Hi, it's Neil from Diagonal Move. Welcome back to this campaign game of Crossing the Line, Aachen 1944. And we're joining turn 6 in the operations phase, and the Germans are faced with a major problem. Basically what's happened is the interdiction level has risen again in this turn. It rose in turn 5, it's risen again now during the admin phase, and the result of that, combined with a unfortunate roll for formation activations, means that the majority of their units, all four here, have got just one formation activation in the entire turn. I also have a unit at the 12th here with 4 and the new reinforcements with 7. So realistically, you're looking at 1, possibly 2 divisions with a good chance of doing something meaningful in this turn. And that's a real problem for them, because the Americans, for their part, have the majority of their divisions on 4, 6 and 7 formation activations. This turn has seen reinforcements for both sides, most notably the Germans here with the return of the 116th Panzers. They were taken off during turn 4, I believe, as part of the withdrawals, and they are now back in greater strength and with greater mobility and command range compared to previously. And I positioned them here in this town of Eichweiler so that I hope we can use their mobile units to move up this road here and this road here and try and do something about the Americans' encirclement there of Ulsdorf, which is this red blob here of all the outer command German units from their 183rd Division. Quite a tricky challenge for the Germans, with so few formations having anything meaningful in terms of activations, and the majority of them, I fear, are going to just sit here and really just try not to be defeated too much, try to just stand their ground a bit. With the independent units here, I've assigned them to the 526 again, and much as I would have liked to have assigned them down below, the Germans tend to have a more limited command range than their American counterparts, here with only 8 and there with only 8, and sadly 8 hexes is only about here, meaning that we cannot get the further independent units up here under the command of the 246, and we had to place them under the 526 just there. Not quite sure how that is going to affect the game. Both divisions only had one formation activation, but it just feels like they would have been better with this division here, because this division here does have more units generally than the 526, who have taken quite a beating during this game so far. Interesting thing with the command ranges is that we have a 12. We've finally got a division with a decent command range for the Germans, as well as some really quite meaty units. Here, this stack here has got some fairly strong steamroller type formations all stacked together. And finally something that is on a par with the Americans' units from the 3rd and 2nd Armoured. Speaking of which, the 2nd Armoured has been reinforced also, just up on the very top of the map there in the centre. Just there we have the rest of the 2nd Armoured, and again they've gone off shot just there. 2nd Armoured, and hopefully they're going to come down this way and they try and prevent the Germans preventing the encirclement there of Ulsdorf. Ulsdorf being one of the victory point hexes, with Würselen there being the other, and the Ruhr River all the way off to the side here being the 4th. So an interesting challenge for the Germans. The Americans, for their part, have got the means and the resources to simply keep doing what they were doing and try and take as much ground and as many of those victory point hexes as possible. The 29th Infantry up there in the very corner where the reflection of my screen is have also arrived for the Americans, and they will be travelling down the roads along there. A bit difficult to see with the reflection from the window, but down the road here to try and surround the Germans, cut off the supply route back to their supply area, off to the map, off to one side again. The map is quite big, it's quite challenging to fit it all onto the screen at one time. Okay, before I disappear off and start the game, just a quick overview of how formation reactions work. It was requested during the comments for one of the recent campaign updates, and there is a full video around how the game works that I'll put a link to down below in the description. But just as a quick recap for formation reactions, let's just pretend for a moment that the Americans are the active player, and the Americans are going to send a unit, and I'll just say it's this unit here. They're going to send a unit off this way to try and get to the Ruhr River, and they move past a German unit. For argument's sake, we'll just say it's this one. The Germans then have the option, because they're the non-active player, of attempting to do a formation reaction. So you can think of these as something like opportunity fire or defensive fire that you might find in some other games, where the non-acting player gets potentially to do something. Well, in this case, rather than just attempting a fire, you can do any of the actions that you choose, but you need to first pass a formation activation test. Now, how do you do that? Well, there is a small number 7 there on the HQ counter. Roll a die equal to or under that number, and you can begin your formation reaction. When you get a formation reaction, the active player, which in our example here is the Americans, will stop acting. The Germans will take over. They will roll for their formation activation as normal. However, the result would be the red column rather than the black column. So you'd have a fewer number of action points to work with. Once the reacting player, the Germans in this case, have finished their reaction activations, they've done what they want to do, the play will then go back to the Americans to carry out the rest of their turn before having to eventually go on and re-roll the initiative. It's a really neat way of making the game very interactive at 2 players, and has adds some interesting strategic things for the solo player as well, but it really does shine with 2. I hope that's been helpful. Hope that's given a brief overview of how that system works. I'll just move my unit back to where he was, and see you at the end of the turn. We've reached the end of the turn now, and yeah, it's been a difficult turn for the German side, and more or less as I expected it to be. The weight of the interdiction, reducing those formation activation levels, really meant that this whole line here was more or less static the entire turn. Was able to do a few strategic running away moves, which in a way was actually really helpful, because it allowed the Germans to sort of position some of their infantry in this more favourable wooded and industrial area, and that's quite important from the German side, because the mobile units, the tanks and so on and so forth, they really can't move that well when you go off-road, and they also struggle to project zones of control into anything other than clear or clear with a pillbox as a terrain. So that kind of running away element has really helped the Germans, particularly down on this part here, where the 3rd Armoured are now kind of ground to a halt a little bit because of the way the terrain works against them in terms of combat support and zone of control. The other issue the Americans are having down in the south here, and to a lesser extent everywhere else as well, is they're not really linking up that well with the infantry. So what I'm noticing is that you really need to make use of the ability to assign infantry units to armoured and vice versa for the American side, so that you can have that infantry supporting your armoured units when it comes to those industrial town, city, wooded hexes. That's something that's not really worked that well down here very well, and it was working well up here, but the first and the third here was going quite well, but then the 1st Infantry just had a number of terrible activation rolls and more or less ground to a halt as the city fighting in and around Aachen, as I've been informed I actually should pronounce it, so apologies for that, but fighting in and around the city here was bogging down the 1st Infantry. From the German side, these units that did more or less remain static, they held their ground really, really well, and plenty of disruption of units on both sides, both infantry and armoured divisions. The 2nd Armoured for the Americans have tried to push down here and have met some quite fierce resistance from the German 116th Panzers, and the 116th did a very good job in keeping the 2nd Armoured back. Again, real lack of coordination between the 2nd and the 30th Infantry on the American side, meaning they really didn't get as much leverage out of those extra activations as perhaps they could have done. The Germans are holding still the victory point hexes at Eichweiler, threatening the American victory point hex here in Würselen, and there is still quite a tussle going on over in Alsdorf for that victory point hex. For the Americans, the other victory point area is for the Ruhr River, and we're finally moving across the part of the map where I can actually show you this on screen. The entire section down here is a victory point area, and the Americans only need to control 1 hex. And so what the Americans have done is they've pushed this 29th Infantry all the way down from the west wall, or the northern part of the west wall, to here to try and make a run for that Ruhr River kind of area and those victory points. Remember, Aachen is the most valuable victory point hex by far, then followed by the Ruhr area, and there is that element also of victory points for strength point losses on the Germans as well. So let's see how it goes. The Americans have really got to try and push forward now as much as possible next turn. We are moving into turn 7, so the penultimate turn, whereas the Germans again have to try and minimise that advance while not sustaining as many losses as they perhaps have been currently. They've taken quite a few. That then is the end of the turn. In terms of reinforcements, the Americans have had all their reinforcements now. The Germans do have another Panzer division coming on, and they will probably be coming on towards the south here, near the Ruhr region. They could optionally come on here, and if there was no American presence there and there as well. However, it's likely, I think, we'll come on down here. But I'll have a think about that between turns and go from there. Okay, thanks for watching. I hope you're finding these updates interesting. It's a fascinating game, real puzzle. If you do like this and it's finding it helpful, please like and subscribe, that kind of thing, and I'll see you next time for turn 7.